not a traditional unboxing today. We had actually 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces that came in. There were also a few Rolexes and things that we've already shown numerous times, but by looking at these 4s, a couple of topics came up with me and Marco as we were discussing them. Number one, about the Holy Trinity, AP, Patek, Vacheron. And also, the biggest question is, why is Greubel Forsey so expensive when it comes to their retail pricing in general? Where is it going? So I wanted to quickly go over the Holy Trinity. And I'm like, Marco, well, why is it these 3 brands? When was the official announcement? Like, how did this happen? But in reality, there was no official announcement, right?
Well, first of all, they're 3 of the most historic brands. You know, obviously VC being the oldest continuous, 1755, AP being, you know, well regarded for their complications. Really, I think the Holy Trinity is more so like a geek collector kind of term, right? That's how we define it. But
I think it has anything to do with price point? Because if you look at the retail prices across, you know, Patek, AP, Vacheron are sort of on that higher echelon. If you look at, look, we have a Vacheron Perpetual here, right? You know, you look at a Jaeger Perpetual in stainless steel versus a Vacheron, the price is a third, right?
Right. When we're talking about quality, design, history, finishing, also pedigree, right? Because listen, JLC has a high pedigree, but maybe they don't have the equity, you know, in terms of, for example, with your average regular customer, right? Because JLC is not a big name, you know, a big name watch brand the same way that Patek and AP are specifically, and what Vacheron kind of has become in recent years, which is awesome to see. But yeah, 3 insanely heavy-hitting watches.
Let's talk about the new Perpetual.
Ultra thin Perpetual. And one thing to note is the blue itself, of all the blue overseas, is made in the same factory as the FP Journe Chronomet blue. So it's the same kind of process to make it. And they're actually very similar color-wise. I mean, it's just all absolutely beautiful. One of the nicest, if not the nicest, sports watches on the market. If you had to pick, right? Patek has their Nautilus Perpetual calendar. AP has Royal Oak Perpetual calendars. I know that's her favorite brand. But if you had to pick one, which is your favorite?
I mean, I'm going to go with AP just because AP is my favorite brand. The variety of Royal Oak Perpetuals out there today, like the RD Perpetual they came out with, that would be a pick. That's a slimmer one. I would go backwards to the skeleton Perpetuals. But, you know, pound for pound, you look at let's say a skeleton Perpetual versus a Royal Oak skeleton Perpetual, which is probably my favorite Perpetual. And, you know, it's hard to, even though I love AP and I would still go with AP, it's hard to say that, you know, AP is, let's say, better looking aesthetically than the Vacheron, because the skeleton version of that is beautiful.
I think it's also about value, right? Like AP, you know, AP has a plethora of Perpetual calendar Royal Oaks you can choose from, all at kind of different price points. Typically, if we're going to talk Royal Oak Perpetuals, right, you're talking probably in excess of 6 figures. Patek is, you know, upwards of 300, 350 now at this point. But the VC presents itself as a great value play that's just as well finished and has all the merits of a Patek or an AP.
In terms of quality, you know, in terms of the movements, Patek movement, AP movement versus Vacheron movement, I think Vacheron wins.
Me too, because I mean, all their watches are finished with the Geneva seal, particularly this. Geneva seal being kind of the highest standard of watchmaking. Patek went to their in-house seal back in 2008. To me, listen, the quality in VC speaks for itself, and it's abundant, and you can really see it once you actually physically hold their pieces. This is a big boy watch.
Let's talk about this Royal Oak offshore tourbillon chronograph from Audemars Piguet. And the reason we want to talk about this is where this came from. So we're going to go back in history a little bit, and I'll let you, this is your stuff, you love this. Let's talk about Renaud Papy, and let's talk about this particular offshore.
In a watch like this, we're talking about a tourbillon chronograph with a 10-day power reserve, if I'm not mistaken, all manual winding. Ultimately, when you engage the chronograph, the clutch of it doesn't take as much amplitude away from the actual power reserve, so the timekeeping is a little bit more accurate. And you get it in arguably the nicest silhouette a watch has ever been made in the Royal Oak. This one obviously being an offshore. And yet still, I think, it's like a little under the radar, right? It's an if you know kind of watch. At a glance, it's just maybe you can mistake it for a regular offshore, and then it's that ultimate like, holy crap.
Well, at a glance, it takes me back to my times. It takes me back to the Audemars Piguet Cabinet 4.
Yeah.
Because the base movement of this stemmed from the Cabinet 4. Now, when they make these special series, the Cabinet series, on a tourbillon chronograph, a 10-day power reserve is huge. It's not highlighted here, but one of the things about the Cabinet 4 was the power reserve itself. That was the biggest thing. That was the biggest innovation, because what ended up happening is that it shows it showed you a 10-day power reserve, and it also showed you the last 24 hours of that power reserve separately. You had the reserve on the bottom of the cabinet for, and then you had the 24 hours there as well. So you knew to the last minute, second, as that power reserve was winding down. Listen, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the Patek 5167. Again, it's here because it happens to be a holy trinity that came in all at one shot. I do want to move on to the Greubel Forsey. Now, Greubel Forsey, the biggest question asked of Greubel Forsey is, who the hell are they and why are they so expensive, right? That's the biggest thing. Now, for those of you who have never had a Greubel Forsey in their hands, it may be a bit hard to relate to what Marco is going to talk about, because I know he's super passionate about this independent watchmaker, or watchmakers, I should say. So let's start from the top. Who's Greubel, who's Forsey?
So we just talked about Renaud Papi in relation to AP. Well, actually, Robert Greubel and Stephen Forsey both actually got their start at Renaud Papi, making some of the most difficult to execute complications on the market, right? So we're talking about two of the highest quality watchmakers in the world today in terms of independent watchmaking. And what separates Greubel Forsey from the pack, in my opinion, is twofold, right? One is the innovation, right? Because watchmakers can't be, they can't be the best at anything, right? 𝗵𝗕 is probably more so known for his innovation, for example, than somebody like a Philippe Dufour, who's known for his godlike finishing, right, in his watches. But Greubel Forsey packs that innovation along with the insane finishing of a Philippe Dufour. So you literally get the highest level. In my opinion, they're really the best in the industry, right? And that's what makes ultimately...
I will agree that they're the best finished watches, and I would also add to that finishing is something that a lot of collectors out there almost miss.
Right.
I don't even want to say downplay. They almost miss it. It's not talked about enough. Today, in today's day and age in industry, obviously popularity, i.e. hype, is talked about a lot. Complications are talked about a lot. Oh, I got a perpetual count. I got a tourbillon. Oh, I have a minute repeater on, a combination of thereof. Yeah. But finishing is something that's so extremely overlooked, which is what gravitates you to Vacheron over AP and over Patek. The finishes, besides the quality, it's also the finishes.
Right.
And I don't think people realize how difficult it actually is to achieve those finishes, and let's get into that for a second.
I mean, we're talking about Greubel Forsey has about 1,000 employees working for them, and they're making about 100 watches a year, right? So we're talking about 1,000 people literally sitting there finishing components, assembling movements to produce about 10 watches a month. It can't be understated just the level of quality and execution you get in something like this, and we'll show like the movement of this, but all the different like levels of finishing, right? From the graining of the actual bridges, all of these polished bevels inside of, for example, the bridges themselves, the circular finishing of the actual base plates. For example, the wheels, which are all spoked and all ultimately polished. You have the gold chatons holding in the jewels. Again, another hallmark of quality. The blued screws, which just kind of adds that extra effect.
You gotta visualize a watchmaker sitting there, taking the tiniest of these tiniest little parts and literally finishing each part by hand.
He has a piece of wood the size of his fingernail, literally just scraping away with like a little paste, and just to see, in some cases, like parts of the watch that you'll never see, but when they disassemble and assemble the movement, when servicing it, they'll actually understand and appreciate, like, wow, this was really taken to the next level. Is it completely unnecessary, or is it sticking with traditions that are hundreds of years old? 100%. 100%. I can't state that enough, right? That is the traditional watchmaking. When they had closed case backs 100 years ago making wristwatches, if you open their case backs today, they would still be finished to an excruciatingly high level. It's like they would be afraid, like if people open their watches 10, 50 years from now, right, they would kind of get in trouble for it. But yeah, I mean, it can't be understated just how incredible a watch like this is.
We talked about finishing, which is something that's often overlooked and underappreciated in today's industry, and it shouldn't be, because that's the traditional watchmakers that goes back hundreds of years, number one. That's where the value comes in. So the fact that this watch at one time retailed for around $500,000, I think $485, around $500,000, right? That's the hand finishings are justified, which really translates into amount of hours a skilled watchmaker, finisher, etc., will spend on just finishing each part of the watch before it's even assembled. Let's get into the innovation of things. This is the invention piece number 3.
Correct. Yeah. So I believe the first invention piece was a double tourbillon 30-degree technique. Then the second was some kind of regulating organ. I honestly, off the top of my head, I can't remember. But the third one is a 24-second tourbillon with a 30-degree incline, and you can actually see that incline if you want to get close up. And the reason that they do that ultimately is a couple of things, right? First of all, it's a 24-second tourbillon, which makes it a lot more interesting than, for example, a 60-second tourbillon. And then
let's go back to layman's terms. So in layman's terms, Your tourbillon will adjust your watch for the effect that gravity had on the watch.
Correct.
Invented for the Queen by Piguet. She was complaining her pocket watch was running slow, so now any traditional tourbillon in reality would only work when it's perpendicular to the ground, i.e. much like a pocket watch.
Correct.
When wristwatches today, if you're wearing a watch like this, theoretically that tourbillon is not really doing anything. You have an inclined tourbillon now that allows you to have that watch in multiple positions to have that tourbillon working, right?
Yep.
But in reality, this adjustment happened every 60 seconds.
Correct.
Any given tourbillon, odds are it's going to take 60 seconds. They pushed it up to 24 seconds. I think that in reality it's unnecessary. It's more of a flex, but that's what Greubel Forsey will do in the innovation aspect of things. Just like they do it in the finishes, they're going to do it in the innovation aspect of it to say, you know what? Oh, you guys make your tourbillon that does it every 60 seconds. Mine is going to do it every 24 seconds, which is again a flex, but it's a horological flex, if you will.
Yeah, so we all, I mean, not even to neglect something that we didn't mention, right, was, so we've talked innovation, we talked finishing, but even just, for example, something like the case, right, which is so underrated, case making. I mean, just to achieve these kind of like little bevels on the outside of the case, if you see these kind of bubbles here. This is a handmade case, right, and you can just tell just the way that it's made because these lugs would be soldered on, all of the effects of soldering on the lugs are finished off, all the different finishing techniques, right, from polish to brush on the actual case itself. I mean, it's just to a degree that is unlike anything else in the industry. It's unmistakably Greubel Forsey because nobody else does watchmaking like this.
So let me go back to leading up to that 2008 crisis when the market was hotter than ever. There were a lot of companies jumping the bandwagon, and what they were doing is they were making super complicated watches. They were spitting them out really, really fast, so the quality really wasn't there. Setting super high retail prices and selling them at a heavy discount because a lot of those things were given as gifts and things like that. Won't mention any brand names, that's not what this is about, but there were quite a few brands, which I've bought and sold, the brands that where a watch would retail for $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, I would buy it at 30 cents on the dollar, sell it to somebody at half off, they got a smoking deal, gave somebody a $600,000 gift at a cost of $300,000. And Greubel Forsey did not fall under that because the main question that we're talking about is why they're so expensive. How do we justify a $500,000 price tag? Starting with the amount of hours that's put into making every single watch. The fact that they make so little is not because they choose to, it's because of the process they have in place. The amount of time and money that goes into innovation of creating something new. It's very difficult to invent stuff today, right? Nobody is going to wake up tomorrow and say, I'm going to make a ketchup packet, or I'm going to make a Post-it note. It's very difficult to innovate nowadays.
Especially in watchmaking, right?
And in watchmaking, it's been there, it's done. So the only thing they're able to do is take something that's existing, make it better, make it different. So the amount of time they spend on innovating to come up with this. The second amount of time it takes to actually design of the case. It's a different case, it looks different. Like these little bump outs and stuff, that's different than from anyone else. And people think, oh, well, what's the big deal? Just make the case, make a couple of bump outs. Well, everything has to work in unison. It's the movement that goes in there. There's rhyme and reason for these bump outs out there, right? Then we're talking about the amount of time it's spent just on something that most brands will not go through, and that's those hand finishes, right? And then you get into the complication itself, this being a tourbillon, a 24-second inclined tourbillon, et cetera, et cetera. That's what makes up that $500,000 price tag. It's the time, it's the innovation in both design and horology, and it's the time it takes to make the perfect watch utilizing traditions that go back hundreds of years.
Right. And people may ask themselves, you know, like, why does a watch like this that retailed for, let's say, $500,000, because this is actually the much rarer example in platinum versus, you know, for example, its current market price, which, you know, how many are out there, right? It's kind of a take your pick. But let's say, you know, $500,000, right? So selling maybe 50 off retail. And the truth is, listen, independent watchmaking is still, as much as it has exploded in popularity in recent years, it is still very, you know, very niche, right? Like, for example, maybe,
this big.
Right. Let's take, for example, maybe the biggest independent brand in the world today, Vacheron. 5 years ago, I mean, these didn't even sell at retail.
Marco,
you know what I mean?
I remember the times where I could walk into an Vacheron boutique and get a discount.
Right.
Just to buy one.
And now you practically have to go on your hands and knees and beg them for an entry-level base model.
Or you're paying double, triple list in certain models in order to get it. So to go to that and finish this conversation, I'm going to finish it off with independence. A lot of the times you guys have noticed we're out there actively buying up independent brands. And why are we doing that? Well, for one, they sell. For two, I see a bigger value versus some of the more mass-produced companies that are out there. I mean, let's face it, you look at your average everyday watches from Swatch Group, Richemont Group, besides a few particular brands like 𝗕𝗨𝗬 or 𝗕𝗏𝗍. The rest of the stuff, it's starting to feel like they're being put together on the assembly line, trying to keep the prices down, therefore the cost of the movements down, and so on and so forth. And that's not the route I want to see the watch industry go. I don't, the watch industry has been cheapened and at the same time hyped up on pieces that perhaps don't deserve the amount of hype. What I want to see is I want to see stuff like Greubel Forsey. I want to see stuff like MB&F, which in my opinion is the most innovative as far as I'm concerned. And I want to see people and I want to spotlight these brands because this is what true watch collecting is about. It's about a watch such as this or this for that matter. I told you guys before, you always ask me, what's a good investment? What's this? And I always told you the same thing. I don't have a crystal ball, but I can always tell you my opinion. And in my opinion, I think independent watchmaking, we're just reaching a point where you're going to see them blow up and take off. Groeneveld,
de
Bethune,
𝗵𝗵𝗄.
So you're seeing examples already of where these watches are starting to trade. And in my opinion, these guys are the biggest sleepers. And the only culprit and the only reason why these watches didn't really take off like crazy is because of the price points. People didn't understand, which is why the original question of this video was, why are they so expensive? Once you start to understand, then it becomes real that, oh my God, to buy that watch for $250, it's actually a smoking deal.
I mean, even in comparison to the peers, I don't want to keep dragging this on, right? But we'll finish on this kind of note, right? Like, let's compare a watch like this to their peers. An Vacheron 𝗕𝗏 we're talking what? A very innovative watch, very technically proficient, doesn't have the same degree of finishing, nowhere near in my opinion, and it's still going to sell in excess of 300,000+, depending obviously on the variation. Some going over $1 million at this point. Take even a Philippe Dufour, right, which kind of rivals it in terms of finishing quality. These are auction-only pieces selling upwards of 800,000 at this point. Yeah, you get the best of both worlds for a fraction of the price of both of those watches, and they're just as innovative and just as well finished. So to me, Greubel Forsey is that sleeper hit, right? I think it just is.
So let's agree the fact that Greubel Forsey in general is a sleeper. And let's talk about the fact that if you look at their new models, I'm starting to see the trend. So some of the newer models, their sport line, it's slightly cheaper in retail, and they're selling at retail, and good luck finding one of them.
Yep.
And that's sort of like a first sign.
Yep.
Guys, girls, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Instagram Live. Thank you, YouTube. YouTube, like, comment, share, subscribe. Thank you, everyone on Instagram that has tuned in. Stay tuned, and we'll see what happens to Greubel over the next 3 years.